orientation, you guys. So, just to remind everybody, I know everybody just flew in. We're sort of still getting our bearings here. It's overcast, a little hard to see where the sun is, right? But basically, we're in this part that we've been talking about, English Turn, right? And this is this bottomland, awesome bottomland hardwood forest. It used to be all over the place, right? All contiguous. And essentially, we've been messing with it, right? In various ways, we've been messing with it. And it's important to say that this is, in addition to all the wonderful biodiversity and all the important ecosystem services and all that kind of stuff that this forest supports and does this, it also has some very tangible, to us, humans, ecosystem services, ecosystem values. And the most conspicuous one is dealing with storms and helping us minimize catastrophes. So we used to have, City of New Orleans, a bunch of, and recall this is all wetland, by our definition of wetlands, wooded wetland, we use the term swamp. We'll also call this bottomland hardwood forest, we can call this swamp. Herbaceous plant-dominated wetlands, we call marsh. So it went basically New Orleans, and then as we go towards the ocean, as we go towards the Gulf of Mexico, then forested wetlands, so swamp, treed wetlands. As we keep going towards the ocean, sort of a mix of herbaceous and woodlands. And then as we get closer to the Gulf, more saltwater, just marshy, and then you get into more tidal channels and stuff like that, right? That's how it was. So back in the day, from here, we probably could go almost 60 miles before we got really pure open water. Say 75 years ago, something like that. Now, depending on which angle we pick, it can be about 14 miles to just pure open water. So we've been Swiss cheesing out these wetlands, right? We've been eroding this important resource. And that's a couple different reasons. The most important one is the fact that we levee the Mississippi, right? So there are natural levees on the Mississippi, that's all good, but we've augmented those. And later today we're gonna go look at how we did some of that. But basically we've essentially cut off the sediment input. So one of the things you're gonna see as you walk around our site is you're gonna see, for example, cypress knees, which would typically be like my calf or my knee kind of height off above the ground. They'll be like more like my chest or more. So the ground here has subsided a lot, feet, right, from where it was, let's say, 75 years ago. And that's because we've cut off, one, the typical inundation, the water that makes this soil anoxic. And so therefore, when the leaves and the stems and the twigs fall in the soil, it takes them a long time to degrade because water, is sitting there and it's stagnant and you can't get really aerobic microbial degradation. It has to be anaerobic, so it's a lot slower. So these wetlands are typically characterized by high organic matter in the soil, which basically means, dead stuff and then a lot of, rock stuff and then a lot of dead stuff and then rock, so there's a lot of mixed materials in the soil structure. Once we've cut off that water, one, because we're actively pumping, we're actively draining this area now, because people decided that's what they want to do, which is a bad idea, but that's what we do. And then two, we've cut off the sediment input. The soil is sinking, it's compacting, that organic stuff is turning into carbon dioxide and going into the atmosphere, and so the spaces inside the soil are crushing, and so the soil is getting more compact and the soil level is dropping, and then we don't have that addition of new seasonal addition of sediment onto the top to counteract that. There's other things going on too, but those are the two big problems we're facing. So this site was, so as you'll see later on we drive, if we were to go a little bit farther this way, so the river is like here and it goes like this, right? So this is the English Turn, right? It kind of wraps around us. But if we were to go basically straight east from us, we would get to a big giant golf course. And that went in the 70s, right? 70s? Yeah, 70s. And carved it up in big giant houses and links and all that kind of stuff. And then developers kind of said, hey, so this was an area, so where we're straddling, we're right now in Plaquemines Parish. Where we were sleeping last night, Orleans Parish. So we're literally right next to the edge of the two, what we would call county lines, right? So we straddle these two things. So this area was, kind of rural country. People like horses, lived out here. Not big developments. And then that English Turn golf course went in, and people said, "Whoa, maybe we can develop more here." So then this interest in doing more development out here, right? And so so this parcel, people thought was privately owned, okay? And long story short, it turned out it was not. It was owned by the parish. It was government property. And then when people figured that out, some of these developers kind of started saying, "Hey, maybe we can turn this into another big development. This chunk where we are sitting right now." And so essentially, that's when Katie, our colleague, who you've not met yet, but you will, who's the head of Woodlands Conservancy, which started out as a nonprofit, now is a land trust. So if you guys are taking land use or whatever, you know the differences. But basically, it's a nonprofit, environmental-oriented organization. And they said, "Hey, parish," and this was just essentially old trails, right? Old infrastructure and stuff out here, but people kind of did whatever they wanted, right? And she said, "Hey, can we do some stuff to make the trails a little more conducive to people riding horses, people walking dogs, people with their kids, that kind of stuff?" And so they said, "Okay, sure," right? And so the nonprofit started originally as just a helper of this land, right? Not as a landowner. And so the original name was Woodlands Trail. What was the original name? Woodlands Trails. Yes, Woodlands Park and Trail, right? Woodlands Park and Trail was the original incorporated name, name. And then it sort of evolved. And so that was before Katrina. And Katie was doing her stuff and making slow progress. Then Katrina happened, and as Tom talked about in his talk, all of these forests got super tweaked, right? Essentially, the big challenge here was this big giant hurricane came through right at the time of year when some of our most problematic invasive species, woody species, had just set their seed, had flowered, fertilized, seeds were just sitting on the branches, and were ready to be dispersed. And so if we'd come in here, not right here, but a couple hundred meters in the forest, if we'd been here before Katrina, it'd be a little bit hard to read a newspaper in the midday, right? So it's shaded. There are ferns around, kind of dark, closed canopy, that kind of stuff. 30-meter tall canopy, 20-meter tall, like that kind of big stuff. Katrina comes in, haircuts the top of the forest, right? So buzz cuts the top. Rips off all the vegetation, breaks a bunch of trees, all that kind of stuff, which is problematic in and of itself. Before the storm, there are 3 problematic woody invasive species, mostly on the edges. Here, where we're standing here, on like the very sort of edge of this, but not really down in the middle, right? So the low light, the closed canopy acted as physical barriers and were better competitors. The natives were better competitors than these invaders. But now the storm comes in, crew cuts, boom, spreads all the seeds, and now this whole area was dark is now highlight and heavily disturbed. So all of a sudden these species start taking off. So the very first trip or the very first class, we showed up, didn't know what we were doing. Everybody was gone still. Everybody was still gone in Houston, everybody was gone and dislocated to different places, and couldn't find anything. Katie was trying to get this place rehabilitated, right? Get the trails cleaned up, and start to collect some baseline data so that she could get federal monies to do restoration and all this and that, but she didn't have anybody. Everybody was evacuated. The people that were doing the stuff that we do, environmental surveys and stuff like that, were all hired with the big oil companies dealing with oil spills and all these big giant projects. For a relatively small project like this, she just couldn't find any physical bodies to help her, right? Tulane was closed, the university was closed down. We took several students at Channel Islands from Tulane, so everything was devastated. And so we showed up, she goes, "Well, can you help us monitor the invasives?" We're like, "Oh, no, okay." So we literally went to a restaurant and on the back of a napkin designed a really quick and dirty monitoring plan. Over the first couple of years that evolved a little bit into what we have now. And then we've been essentially monitoring ever since. And so the 2 years with the pandemic, we weren't allowed to travel, we did not collect data, but all the other years we've been monitoring here. So we now have a network of things. There's the stuff you guys are going to do, the band transects, which will remind you guys how we're going to do that. The band transects, which are going off the trails, and then we have some permanently installed plots that the faculty will take charge of monitoring those. In recent years, we've also started bringing our drones. So one of Zach's main tasks is to fly our EV and to map the canopy right now aerially with our drones. And so we do vegetation monitoring from the trail, we do vegetation monitoring in our permanent plots, and we do aerial-based drone stuff. We will also do a bit of fun stuff So not today, but probably Sunday, we'll put out camera traps and sticky traps. So we'll get a little glimpse at what the critters are like here, and we'll get a little glimpse at the invertebrates that are cruising around here. And so that's what we're gonna do. So we need to get this stuff done. We want to get this done. We also want to get over to our Delacroix site, which is, so I've described this site. This is, we call this our Woodlands Preserve site. We also, this was the first site, the original site. We'll monitor this every year. We also acquired a parcel over a couple miles, just a little bit over there, that is very different. It's much more cypress. It's much healthier. It's a different elevation and stuff. We own outright. The NGO owns outright. And then more recently, last year, we actually purchased this. So now our NGO owns this parcel and owns that other parcel. So it's awesome. So the fact that you all have been coming here, and I know you guys are like, well, I'm not a botanist. I'm still learning my plants. It's all good. You're gonna know them soon. And the work that you're putting into this is super, super important. So on the order of hundreds of, like, I forget last time we calculated, $600,000, $700,000 worth of matched labor, that if we didn't do this, these guys would have to raise that money for. And the fact that we come from across the country to help this also helps to argue that this is an important thing, this is a special place, that people would come all the way across the country because they think this is cool. All that stuff is really, really important. So you guys are part of a legacy which is helping this area recover very tangibly, very, very tangibly, right? If we were not a part of this, I don't want to say it wouldn't happen, but it certainly would not have happened probably the way it's happened, but you guys should be very proud of this legacy that we've been able to contribute to, and you guys will be contributing over this week. So yeah, so that's my introduction. Did I leave anything out? All right, cool.
Can I get the name of the other site again?
So this one is, so you might hear me call this Woodlands Trail, because that's our old name. The official new name for this is Woodlands Preserve, this parcel here. So we'll probably say Woodlands. This is Woodlands.
Got it.
Although, just so you know, everybody calls everything Woodlands.